Uncle Bill Nicholson, Wurundjeri Elder, other elders present, Provost Professor Margaret Shield, Ms June Oscar, AO, Deputy Vice-Chancellor Professor Carolyn Evans, Professor Jim McCluskey, DVC Research, Professor Richard James, DVC Academic, Pro-Vice-Chancellors, Deans, Deputy Deans and Associate Deans, students and fellows, friends. It is wonderful to have all of you here with us at the University of Melbourne to hear the 2017 Narrm Oration. Narrm, of course, is the name of the traditional estate here where we are. Please be advised that these proceedings are being recorded, and please ensure that your phones are turned off. And may I thank Rob Bamblett. Thank you so much. Our Parkville campus, one of several in Victoria, is on the land of the Wurundjeri people. The University of Melbourne is committed to observing Aboriginal cultural protocols and hold these as fundamentally important in the development of respectful relationships between institutions such as our university and the traditional owners of the land on which our campuses are located. One of our strategic priorities is fulfilling our responsibilities to Indigenous Australians and contributing to the broader social movement towards reconciliation between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Australians. These protocols were announced by our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Glyn Davis, on the 12th of February 2008 to coincide with the apology made to the stolen generations by the then Prime Minister, Mr Kevin Rudd, on behalf of the Australian Parliament. In his statement, Professor Davis said, "The University of Melbourne is a community that aspires to participate in the creation of a diverse and harmonious nation. Our aim is to bring greater benefits to the Indigenous people of Australia through education and research, and to do so by involving Indigenous people in those endeavours. In accordance with our commitment to respect for the traditional owners and for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the original inhabitants of the continent, an important university event such as this annual Narrm Oration, the signature Indigenous event in our calendar, we begin with the customary Welcome to Country ceremony. Only a representative of the traditional clan of the location at which the function is being held can provide a Welcome to Country. Therefore, it is my honour to introduce Wurundjeri Elder Uncle Bill Nicholson Jr. to deliver the Welcome to Country. Bill Nicholson Jr. has been working in cultural education for over 20 years. He currently works as the Cultural Education Manager at the Wurundjeri Council. And might I say that he's involved in some very interesting work reinstating traditional fire management, traditional Aboriginal fire management in his own country. Bill's responsibilities include Welcome to Country ceremonies, cultural experiences and presentations, dance workshops and cultural awareness training. Uncle Bill Nicholson.
Yes, thank you, Marcia, and thanks to Melbourne Uni for giving me the opportunity to represent my community. As I have a short time, I'm going to get straight to the point. I'd like to start off Welcome to Country in the language of this land. Yes, we are the Wurundjeri. We are the traditional people of this country, connected for tens of thousands of years. And we had our own special, unique identity expressed through our language. So I'd like to say, Waminjika, Gamala Mangil, Wurundjeri Balak, Narrm, Nirina Maranbik Bill Nicholson. Welcome, greetings to Wurundjeri country. The name of this place is Narrm. My name is Uncle Bill Nicholson. Now, Aboriginal diversity is a great thing. Over 250 languages, 700 dialects, 3,000 plus clans. The Wurundjeri Willam was the one surviving clan of the Woiwurrung-speaking people. Our symbol of our connection to country is the sacred river, now known as the Yarra, traditionally known as the Birrarung, the Misty River. Traditional Wurundjeri culture was very sustainable. Next time you fly out of Melbourne, some of the sites out there date at 42,000 years. We're a very structured society under traditional law, a very knowledgeable society, especially here being in a university where knowledge is power. Traditionally, young children were brought up with extended knowledge of their family members, so they knew their roles and responsibilities at a lot younger age than what adulthood is going today. And a very efficient culture. So if you're working full time, you're working harder than my ancestors. 2 to 6 hours a day to sustain your family, depending on up to 8 seasons here on country. And a very fit and healthy culture where games like Marngrook, traditional football, were played for generation after generation. Who managed this culture? How did it survive for so long, and how is it still around today? Well, it's because of our wise elders, our leaders, the wisdom passed down from generation to generation. I would like to acknowledge my elders past for my identity, my culture, my survival. I'd like to extend that to any elders in the room here today and the wider community as well. Leaders of our community are extremely important to guide the rest of the community into a successful future. And talking about leaders and knowledge, I'll give you a couple of names from my family. If you live here in Melbourne, I encourage you to maybe even look them up and see who they are. Billabulary, the great headman of this land, his brother Bebijern, the songman, the knowledge keeper, Jaika Jaika, the great lawman, their sons, Keel Bundora, William Barak and Simon Wonga, who led us through the most difficult part of our history. And I've got to acknowledge my grandmother and my grandmother's sister, who set up the Wurundjeri Land Council back in the mid-80s to take care of our cultural heritage management and to protect it in an ever-growing city of Melbourne. Traditional ceremony is called Tandarrum. It's very similar to Australian law today, which says to you, you need a passport to access someone else's country. Traditionally, this is your passport. Messengers were sent out over great distances, called Mungul Kolk, make word on wood, message stick. Once they were conveyed, a period of time later, the tribes would gather. many ceremonial gathering places very close to where we actually are right now meeting. The process of Narrm was the offering of vegetation to symbolise your access to the resources, the snapping of spears to symbolise safety, the offering of water to symbolise trust and relationships, and the smoking ceremony to symbolise cleansing of what we call murup, your spirit. Now, I'm not going to light the fire up there, it's a bit hard in the theatre, but I'd just like to say, Wurundjeri law says this, and I am here to, I suppose, to keep our law strong and let people know about what kept our culture structured and strong for so many thousands of years. It says you can't be welcome to this land unless you respect this land, its people and its culture. And if you do, and by inviting me here, Melbourne University has showed that, so I say thank you. So I'd like to say, Waminjika Yiman Wurundjeri Balakulambiek, welcome to Wurundjeri home, welcome to Wurundjeri country, and congratulations to everyone here receiving your award. So good on you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Only a few times in my lifetime have I met women who changed the world. And tonight I am honoured to introduce to you one of these women. Ms. June Oscar AO was chosen to deliver the 2017 Narrm Oration by our professors and executive because she is an outstanding leader who cares deeply about the cultural survival of the Bunuba people and other Aboriginal peoples, the health and well-being of her community and especially the children. On the 9th of February this year, she was appointed to the position of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner of the Australian Human Rights Commission. As the Commission President, Professor Gillian Triggs, noted on that day, this is the first appointment of an Indigenous woman to that role in its long history. Ms Oscar is a proud Bunuba woman from Fitzroy Crossing in Western Australia. She is an advocate for the preservation of culture in the Kimberley and its value for young Aboriginal people. She has been the chair of the Kimberley Language Resource Centre and is a member of the Kimberley Aboriginal Law and Culture Centre. In 2007, June and other women at Fitzroy Crossing decided to take action against the rivers of grog that was seen as the source of many social problems in the region. She lobbied government to impose a ban on full-strength takeaway alcohol in the region. This journey was documented in the film Yajalara. The rise in fetal alcohol spectrum disorder was one of the catalysts for Ms Oscar's work. In 2009, Ms Oscar was involved in establishing the Lililwan prevalence study into fetal alcohol spectrum disorder with the George Institute in Sydney and is a chief investigator on that project. June has also displayed her talents in the education arena, developing a curriculum for an Indigenous knowledge program for Wesley College in Victoria and as a member of a number of education-related committees. Since 2010, she has been a council member of the Australian Institute for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies. In 2009 and 2012, she was an Australian delegate to the UN Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues in New York. In 2010, Ms Oscar and her colleague Emily Carter were WA finalists in the Australian of the Year Local Hero Award, and June is the recipient of the prestigious Desmond Tutu Reconciliation Fellowship in 2016. The award celebrates individuals doing extraordinary work in reconciliation. Chairman of the fellowships, Dr Charles Lane, lauded Ms Oscar's ability to bring about constructive discussion between conflicting and often angry groups. We are proud that Ms Oscar has accepted our invitation, and over the next 5 years of her term, we will follow her progress with interest and offer our friendship and assistance to her in pursuit of her goals. I welcome Ms June Oscar AO to deliver the 2017 Narrm Oration.
Marcia. Thank you, Uncle Bill, on behalf of your people, making us all feel welcome. Yananga warangara ingirangi wa moai, ngundaji. Uranjiri yanu moai. Palangara wajirega la jara ninge. Kamali ngundaji wa moai ingirango. Nyera mangara dangane. Yananga mia ngundaji inga moai ingirango. Winyera ngaraga dangane. Yadawara, ulalawara, Kalanguru ngara kurda. I say to you that I stand here on your country, the country of your people, the Wurundjeri. There are many of us that have come here to your place, and we speak different languages. And we are Gamali, we are like strangers coming to your place. It is the first time this space hears my language, and that we come here, and I come here, to sit, to stand, to talk with you with good feeling. Thank you. So good evening, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, whose land that we're all gathered on here tonight. And I pay my deep respects to the elders of the Kulin Nation, past, present, and the many generations to come. And I extend this respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians present tonight, and to all of you, our non-Indigenous Australians, our brothers and sisters, our friends and colleagues. In particular, I want to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, leaders, who have in their lifetimes called Victoria home. Women like Winifred Narrm Quagliotti, the late elder spokesperson for the Wurundjeri people, renowned for her kindness, foresight and frankness of bearing. Auntie Winnie united her people under the Wurundjeri Tribe Land Compensation and Cultural Heritage Council. We will forever remember her dressed in traditional attire and protesting at the arrival of colonial-era style ships in Melbourne in 1988 for the bicentenary celebrations. An act that marked a decisive moment in the recognition of rights for Aboriginal Victorians. I also want to acknowledge all women, all people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, working with and alongside of the First Peoples of this country. Thank you, Associate Provost, for your warm welcome. It is a great privilege to be here and to be invited to deliver the Narrm Oration, which derives its name from the very land upon which this great city is built. So yes, I am June Oscar, I'm Nyanjili, that's my skin name. I'm a Bunuba woman. And I come from the central Kimberley, the centre of the universe. And I address you today as the first Aboriginal woman appointed to the role of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner. Delivering my acknowledgements in my mother and my grandmother's language, the language of Bunuba country, which stretches back into a deep past, gives me such strength in occupying this position. I speak my language to express my own identity, to affirm my connection to this country and nation, and as acknowledgement to our people, our Indigenous knowledge of Australia, and our remarkable legacy and achievements as the nation's first peoples. Tonight I want to focus on what it means to be an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander woman in this nation, both historically and now, today. The focus of this oration is resilience and reconstruction, and I believe that one of the best ways of understanding how societies withstand large-scale traumas and recohere around societal practices of health and well-being is through the stories of women. The stories I'll share tonight come from women who are our grandmothers, our forebears, our sisters today, and our heroines. They fought for their rights and freedoms to secure them for generations to come, for us. Their lives are vessels carrying stories which teach us invaluable lessons of how to nurture the next generation into health, strength, and success. As the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner, it is my role to raise awareness of the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and to provide guidance to government on how to promote and protect these rights. For me, this role is an opportunity to do all I can to create a national environment ready and capable of transformational change, where the ground is fertile to secure our rights and grow success for all our people for generations to come. At the highest level, sitting atop the myriad of specific issues with which I and my team engage, there are 4 key interrelated national issues: constitutional reform, the declaration of the rights of Indigenous peoples, progress towards closing the gap on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander inequality, and the status of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women in this country, an issue at the forefront of my agenda. I will be launching a national engagement process with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and girls early next month, the purpose of which is to enable them to exercise their right to be heard and for us to listen and develop pathways to act on clear priorities to protect and advance their rights. I'm dedicated also to ensuring people know these mechanisms to open pathways to uphold their rights on the ground. Engaging with our women and girls across the nation is a significant part of enabling this to take effect. Australia has recently been elected to the UN Human Rights Council, and I'll be seeking to provide my guidance to the Australian government to ensure that we as a nation are putting our best foot forward domestically throughout our nation's term in this international leadership role and beyond. On the 13th of September this year, we commemorated the 10-year anniversary of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The Australian government formally adopted the declaration 2 years later in 2009. The declaration was developed by and for Indigenous peoples across the globe, and it is the most far-reaching, comprehensive instrument concerning Indigenous peoples. The declaration is underpinned by 4 guiding principles: self-determination, participation in decision-making, and free, prior and informed consent, respect for and protection of culture, and non-discrimination and equality. Bringing full effect to the declaration has been a challenge for many states around the world, but it is obligatory under the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights that each nation takes key steps towards the realisation of our human rights. Meaningful access to basic human rights has an immense impact on outcomes for individuals and communities. It is my great hope and ambition to help make the declaration a useful tool for our mob, so we know what to expect and demand, and how to negotiate and participate in equitable partnerships into the future. Asserting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices is an important process of self-determination, and recognising our place as the first Australians within this nation. We have consistently called for greater control over our destinies, for the ability to live freely and equally, and for greater recognition of our rights as the first peoples of this land. The Uluru Statement from the heart inspired Indigenous people and many other Australians to think big about our sense of Australian nationhood and the potential for Indigenous recognition and inclusion in Australian nation building. It is with great sadness that we have seen a rejection at this stage for a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament. However, we cannot let this dash our hopes. We can and should continue to call for the Parliament to work with us. One setback, as great as this may feel, is not the end. There are always new pathways to explore and tread together to get the outcome we want. The political systems and institutions of this country remain inadequate at providing us with a voice in the matters that affect our lives. We must give meaning to the rhetoric of doing things with, not to, our people. Our people seek an answer to our powerlessness, and we seek a resolution that will deliver substantive equality. We might disagree on how we get there, as there are a diverse range of views among First Nations peoples about constitutional recognition. I respect that, but we cannot afford to dismiss what our peoples have been calling for over many generations. Neither can it be forgotten that we came together at Uluru at one of the largest and most diverse national gatherings of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We came together in good faith. We found common ground, and we proposed a way forward. The Uluru Statement from the heart also recognises the need to maintain the long-term aspirations of our peoples for a treaty through the creation of a Makarrata or Treaty Commission. The Australian nation should not be unsettled by the term treaty. We know that treaties with Indigenous peoples exist in other countries such as Canada, New Zealand and the United States. At the state level, it is particularly pleasing to see the Victorian government's commitment to a treaty process. This state is leading the way. Furthermore, at the local level, treaty making is already entrenched in Australian public policy and practice through Indigenous land use agreements. The Uluru Statement asked that the Makarrata Commission supervise not only the process of agreement making between governments and First Nations, but also the process of truth-telling about our history. We see institutions mandated to fulfil this role in other countries with similar recent histories to our own. For example, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa and Canada, and the Waitangi Tribunal in New Zealand. Australia has made tentative steps in this direction with the launch of the Healing Foundation following the apology in 2008. However, we are yet to see an institution which has as its core goal bringing truth to light, and in so doing, allowing not only for healing amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, but for reconciliation amongst all Australians. As we look to continue the conversation on constitutional reform, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have made it clear that only substance, not symbolism, will suffice. This issue speaks not only to the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, but to the aspirations of all Australians, about the kind of nation we hope to share together. Together we must ask, what do we hope Australia to be? What nation do we all want to be a part of? And how can we put what we want into action? We know when we have hope, hope is followed by action. And that is what we must all do. As many of you will be aware, the Closing the Gap strategy is currently undergoing a refresh process. The strategy is commendable insofar that it represents a commitment by government to make itself accountable on Indigenous disadvantage. Nonetheless, the lack of progress is deeply concerning. 6 out of 7 targets are not currently on track to be met. Earlier this year, the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous People, Ms Victoria Tully-Corpus, observed the failure of Australian governments to adequately support and meaningfully engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to support our right to self-determination and to ensure our full and effective participation in decision-making. She went on to explain that she saw this as a key contributing factor undermining government's ability to deliver on health, education and employment targets, and to aggravating the escalating incarceration and child removal rates of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. It is critical that government takes on this feedback from the Special Rapporteur in its consideration of what must be done to support our rights to self-determination and participation in decision-making. There is no doubt in my mind that very significant changes are required if the next chapter of the Closing the Gap strategy is to enjoy more success than has the last. All of these interrelated issues that are firmly on my agenda cannot be seen or understood separately from intergenerational trauma. The complex and entrenched harms that many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and men experience on a daily basis and across generations permeate from a painful past. Indigenous experience around the world demonstrates very clearly the impact that colonisation and its ongoing legacies have upon our peoples. When we reflect on some of the atrocities that were committed, as does the Black Day sunrises, blood runs, multimedia display at Melbourne Museum's Bunjalaka Aboriginal Cultural Centre, it is not difficult to understand how we should see the social tragedy facing Indigenous communities within contemporary Australia as similar to societies recovering from the trauma of war and conflict in other parts of the world. Cycles of intergenerational trauma continue to perpetuate and threaten to undermine our and our children's futures. We must address the fundamental importance of rebuilding Indigenous communities whose cultural, social and economic fabric have been shattered by colonisation over many, many generations. It is well known that wellness and educational attainment statistics are generally much lower, and that levels of incarceration, suicide and child removal are generally much higher for Indigenous peoples around the world than for other groups within their national societies. This is the case here in Australia and in Canada and in New Zealand and in the United States. Furthermore, in a number of Indigenous communities within each of these countries, some of these statistics are an order of magnitude higher than that of the national averages. Factors contributing to our disadvantage are more than phantoms haunting us. They are very much alive today in the form of everyday and structural racism. The discrimination, marginalisation and substantive inequality faced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people due to our ethnicity, the colour of our skin, and the view, implicit or explicit, that somehow our relative disadvantage in society is because of our own failure or weakness as individuals, or a result of practicing our culture. We cannot shy away from the reality that in all these ways, racism threatens to keep us in a state of disadvantage where we cannot escape reoccurring traumas. This undermines the realisation of our human rights and the power of our voices to make decisions which bring about large-scale positive impact. We must recognise that our very survival in this country is testament to our strength as a people and to our ability to adapt to conditions. It is evidence of the strength of our culture, which, as I have said many times, must be the bedrock of any solutions to the many challenges we face. We must take the lead in informing processes of structural reform to overcome the legacies of colonisation and reconstruct the fabric of our societies and of this nation. Beside us on this journey are our partners. Governments are part of this process and are our partners as well, ready to incorporate our need and aspirations into policy and meaningful and targeted investment designed to break cycles of intergenerational trauma. Through the voices of our people, with partners by our side, we can realise our visions for the future, and we can succeed. As our people have known for millennia, there is no better way to make a statement, to pass on knowledge and responsibility from one generation to the next, than to tell a profound story. The stories that I'm about to share, as I mentioned earlier, demonstrate greatness in women's struggles for social justice and the rights of their people. These stories are real and are unfolding in quiet, everyday achievements and on public platforms and within international arenas. From the earliest days of contact, Indigenous women have played a major role in asserting our sovereignty, our rights, and our way of life. All these stories highlight the elements of Indigenous strength: language, country, culture, protocols, and practices. These elements bring about a resurgence in health and well-being, and to help break the cycle of intergenerational trauma. It is critical that we protect these elements of strength and introduce them as practices into our everyday lives. Without these strengths interwoven into our lives, we can see a serious breakdown in our familial and parenting responsibilities from one generation to the next. Many of the severe harms experienced in community settings are a manifestation of this cycle of abuse, of despair. With a breakdown in our culture and connections to our community and country, despair can set in, and an individual and collective sense of hope can be lost. It is the spark of hope that I want to ignite in us all tonight. When we feel proud of all aspects of who we are, we have hope. What connects the stories that follow is a hope determined through action. By this I mean, when we feel free to express our identity and culture, we engender hope in ourselves and others. We believe that what we present to the world, how we engage in it, can change the world for the better. Our elders, the women I've looked up to in my life, understood without confusion their obligation to country, culture, and family. Just a little bit about myself. My mother and my grandmother grew me up. They knew every animal, rock, and plant, knew how to find water amongst the tall and endless plains of spiky spinifex and boabs. These lessons took a lifetime to learn and to pass on. One of my grannies, Nyawande, Casey Ross, was also a very important role model to me. She was a very strong cultural woman, a skilled tracker, and a master of 6 languages. It was her who took a lead in facilitating communication with the non-Indigenous people who had come into the Fitzroy Valley. In doing so, she built important relationships and understandings, but she never compromised her own identity. As I was growing up in Fitzroy Crossing, I watched the old women walk tall and with dignity in a dramatically shifting societal landscape. In my lifetime, I saw these determined, healthy women carry babies in coolamans under one arm while supporting the week's shopping goods on their heads with the other. As a new world marched in, they did not relinquish their sense of self, their pride and identity. When I reflect on the remarkable lives of these women, I have strength to assert my voice and rights to a dynamic cultural identity. It is this strength and pride that I want all of our Indigenous women and girls to feel empowered by and believe that they can be who they want to be without fear or shame. In fact, I want all women to feel this power. With these stories in mind, I look out of my window onto Pyrmont Bay in Sydney, and I see the shores of Barangaroo. Barangaroo, like Terranora from Tasmania, were fierce women from centuries ago who stood on the frontier of colonial history and fought so strongly for all of our survival. So many women and many of our Indigenous warriors were persecuted and captured for standing strong, for fighting back and protecting all of our peoples. Their influence and tenacity, too often condemned and silenced by colonial authority, lest they spark an insurrection. These Indigenous women demonstrated remarkable leadership through resistance. I think they, like others, realised much of what was to come, and that resistance would ensure the transference of knowledge and the expression of our cultural identity so as to secure our future rights and the health and well-being of generations to come. It is this knowledge that engenders a unity in Indigenous sisterhood across the globe to continue to resist and fight for our rights as a cohesive people, intimately connected to our family, kinship system, and our land. I'm sure many in this audience tonight have watched with awe the incredible Indigenous activism in halting the progression of the Keystone XL pipeline in the USA. In response, Obama cancelled the pipeline in 2015, only for it to be reinstated by President Trump. Indigenous people across the world felt the pain of those on the ground whose lands were being devastated by the progression of the pipeline. I was particularly moved by the words of Faith Spotted Eagle, a Sioux woman born in South Dakota, which echo my own connection to country. Faith notes that in her language there is actually no word for activism. It is just a responsibility of being a good relative to the earth and those dwelling on it. Similar to her words, our country is where our people need to be able to draw positive emotions, meaning and purpose, self-esteem and resilience. The land provides what we call in my Bonobo language, ngarangani. Ngarangani lies at the heart of our culture. It is timeless. It is all past, present and future. It is our dreaming, our creator, our kinship, morality and ethics. We are of the land, and to care for and protect the land is to nurture and safeguard our families and our future. This holistic view of people and the environment is something we share with many Indigenous communities around the world. This intimately entwined relationship of land, language and culture is common to Indigenous people across the world. Our Indigenous languages are a vehicle to transmit these cultural strengths I've spoken of, to heal our communities and reconcile our nation. Women are so often those who nurture this transmission into a sustained existence. Women such as Jean Pukotaipu, a Maori woman of the Tuaoa iwi. Jean grew up bilingual, speaking her people's language at home, but attended a local school that demanded she speak English. Jean was determined that future generations would retain their people's language, and this would not stand in the way of their wider education. She was a key driver behind the establishment of the first Koangareo, Maori Immersion Language School. Within a year, as both a teacher and coordinator of this initiative, 300 other language nests had sprung up. The movement has served to keep Maori language alive and growing at a time when many feared it was dying out. With this story in mind, I was very pleased to hear too that the New South Wales government has passed new legislation to recognise, revive and protect the languages of the Aboriginal peoples from across that state. It is exciting to see government support for the hard work of Aboriginal community organisations who, like Jean Pukotaipu, have worked tirelessly to encourage and facilitate learning at the grassroots within families and communities. While there are great initiatives afoot and stories of past triumphs and survival that punctuate the present, it is unsurprising that many succumb to the trauma around us. Far too many of our people, particularly our young people, look to drugs and alcohol to numb that pain. Communities across the world are faced with this same predicament every day. The courageous generational story beginning with Phyllis Chelsea from Alkali Lake, a Shuswap Indian reserve in British Columbia, Canada, is captured in the film In Honour of All. Like my own community, this community's story is complex, and the harmful overconsumption of alcohol was a symptom of many underlying traumas. Like my own community, it took women to stand up and say, we must intervene on a crisis if we are going to have some hope of seeing change. Phyllis and her husband Andy were heavy drinkers. In June 1972, Phyllis returned from a weekend of partying to pick up her daughter Ivy from her grandmother's home, only to have Ivy refuse to go home with her until both parents stopped drinking. That's an all too familiar story. Phyllis made a commitment then and there, and when she got home, she poured all the alcohol in the house down the kitchen sink. Over the course of the decade, she worked with her husband and others in the community to dramatically reduce alcohol consumption. By 1979, 98% of Alkali Lake residents were abstainers. This turnaround was not easily won, and the ongoing challenge in the face of deeply entrenched trauma is to maintain community strength in not using alcohol as a way to silence pain. Closer to home, and with Phyllis looking her daughter in the eye, she saw something that I have been emphasising tonight, that in her daughter's hope for change is a better future. Our children are our future. We know that when a child is given the best start in life, that child succeeds through their life. We know that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children are 9.5 times more likely than non-Indigenous children to be in out-of-home care, and that these numbers are only expected to continue. We know that the care system is often a fast track for our children and young people to enter into the justice system. We know that on an average night, our children between 10 to 17 years make up more than half, 55% in fact, of all children in the juvenile detention. This is a national crisis. A crisis that the small town of Bourke in New South Wales is confronting through its successes with justice reinvestment, as was shown on ABC's Four Corners in September last year. Justice reinvestment strategies involve a reallocation of spending from prisons to prevention and the effective coordination of intervention programs to reduce offending, reoffending, and the number of people in custody. As far back as October 2012, the Bourke Aboriginal Community Working Party had been working with Just Reinvest New South Wales to address the challenges facing the community's young people and their all too common interactions with the criminal justice system. The Australian Human Rights Commission was also actively involved from early on through the leadership of my predecessor, Mick Gooder, and Children's Commissioner Megan Mitchell, who actively advocated that government should support the Bourke Aboriginal Community Working Party's vision as articulated in the Marangulka proposal. Christy Kennedy, a young Aboriginal solicitor of the Barkindji and Narrm nations, grew up in Bourke and has now moved back to her hometown from Sydney to take on the role of backbone coordinator at Marangulka Justice Reinvestment Project. When asked why Christy came back to Bourke to take the job, she said, "I was blown away by what they were trying to achieve, reducing incarceration rates and working with local people to make effective change through grassroots people. It's driven by the community." I heard them talking and I thought, I want to be a part of this. All of these stories demonstrate the drive and determination of women to make big, sweeping and meaningful change in the lives of their communities and the broader life of society. These stories of all our women, from colonisation's frontier and the contemporary stories of Faith Spotted Eagle, Jean Pukotapu, Phyllis Chelsea and Christy Kennedy, show how one person's courage and strength they summon within themselves to change course can go on to become the seed that grows to heal their entire community. This is how communities change the path they are on, and how children are born into better conditions than were their parents. However, each of these stories is more than an individual acting in isolation. They show that Indigenous societal frameworks engender caring and supportive communities that can act together to bring about social change. These stories also carry a message to government and other stakeholders who all want to see change on the ground. They must learn to see themselves as partners and act as partners in responding effectively to the needs and aspirations of women, their families and communities. My hope today is that the stories I've told become familiar to all people across Australia, but in particular to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and girls. Imagine if we were actively telling these stories to each other and teaching them to our young women today. Stories that were not just a reflection of history and current struggles, but ones of current strength, resilience, and leadership of all of our women. when we have positive role models in our lives who look like us and are proud of their culture, heritage and history. We believe that we have the right to stand up and be heard. We want all our women and girls to grow and develop in life knowing that they can be the best that they can be, and to see their aspirations reflected in the achievements of other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. Women like Marcia Langton, who in the 2017 winter edition of the Portrait magazine I offered my comments on her remarkable achievements and her influence on me. She is a true intellectual powerhouse. She made me believe that voices from the ground could have wide-ranging influences on policy and legislation. Now, in the national justice arena, it is people such as Marcia that give me the strength to believe in my convictions. It is with excitement that I think of this hope brought about by the influence of women such as Marcia, in line with the 2018 NAIDOC theme, "Because of her we can." As I mentioned earlier, next month I will launch a national human rights-based engagement process with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and girls, which is being supported by the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. Our aim will be to elevate the voices of our women and to guide and influence government to implement policies and practices that foster agency within our communities and provide the conditions for positive change. A key driver for this project was to acknowledge that it is now over 30 years since the landmark Women's Business Report was published in 1986. Marcia was heavily involved in this report, and it is with her and the other women I have mentioned tonight that we wish to uphold and continue their legacy. The Women's Business Report was conducted by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and inquired into the involvement of Aboriginal women in land rights, culture, health, housing, education, employment, legal aid, child welfare with particular reference to adoption and fostering of Aboriginal children. Amongst other findings, the report clearly documented the desire of Indigenous women to have agency in their own lives. And that was the first and the last national engagement with Indigenous women and girls. The Australian nation must invest in a strength-based approach to Indigenous community rebuilding and recovery, and recognise that our female leaders are the greatest agents for change and empowerment in this country. No offence to you blokes. Just look at your mother. There is much to celebrate when we consider the great work being done by Indigenous women and by the non-Indigenous women who have made changes within themselves, supported our aspirations, and partnered with us in building a better tomorrow. As we begin to unlock our collective potential, I know that there is so much more yet to come. Thank you for this opportunity. Yanwa. Thank you. 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 Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Carolyn Evans. I'm one of the Deputy Vice-Chancellors here at the University, and I represent our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Glyn Davis, tonight, who sends his profound apologies that he couldn't be here. Let me too join in acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders here tonight. A particular acknowledgement to Professor Langton and Ms Oscar, of course. It's my honour tonight, on behalf of all of us here, to give a formal welcome to Commissioner June Oscar for her oration and for doing us the honour of travelling to be with us here today, to share her knowledge, her experience and her wisdom with us. We heard a very wide-ranging oration tonight. It covered history, it covered domestic and international law, constitutional reform, or for lack of constitutional reform, public policy, closing the gap, and always stories of hope and courage and a deep commitment from our orator to working from a position of strength and pride in this important role that she has taken on. Ms Oscar spoke eloquently of the importance of hearing the voice of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and in so doing gave us a great demonstration of all that we could learn when we did stop to listen. There's so much richness in this oration that to thank her properly would be to require more time than anyone wants to hear me speak for. So let me just highlight 2 sentences from this oration that spoke very profoundly to me. The first is this. Ms Oscar said, "When we feel proud of all aspects of who we are, we have hope. What connects the stories that she told tonight is a hope determined through action. By this I mean, when we feel free to express our identity and culture, we engender hope in ourselves and others. We believe what we present to the world, how we engage in it, can change the world for the better." And later on she noted, "All of these stories demonstrate the drive and determination of women to make big, sweeping and meaningful changes in the lives of their communities and the broader life of society." Well, we have been privileged tonight to hear from a woman of such determination and drive, who has already done so much to change the world for the better. She has herself lived the very theme of her oration, and doubtless we will all need to reflect on her words for some time before we can fully understand how they can act as a catalyst for change in our own lives. Here at this place of learning, I wish to thank you, Ms Oscar, for bringing to life for us the different ways in which we can learn and understand the world, in everything from a deep analysis of the very confronting statistics and data that you gave to us, to the importance of storytelling and reflection and bringing to life the past in order to build for a more just future. We can have no doubt in years to come there will be a Narrm orator who will be recognising the influential role of June Oscar in our country and well beyond. For now, I can only express my thanks, and I'm sure the thanks of all of us here present, both for your fine oration tonight and being prepared to shoulder the considerable responsibility of being the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Justice Commissioner. All Australians should be proud and grateful that we have a woman of your integrity, insight and earned lived experience in this important role. We wish you well with both the privileges and opportunities, but I'm sure also the burdens and challenges of this office. As you promised, tonight you ignited the sparks of hope in us. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please join with me again in thanking our Narrm orator for 2017, Ms June Oscar.